My name is Tori Thatcher. I'm 32 years old and 5 years ago, 3 days before Thanksgiving, my mother called me and changed the way I understood the word family. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't ask where I'd be traveling from. She said 7 words evenly spaced, like they'd already been rehearsed. Don't come home this year. Victoria doesn't want drama. And then she waited as if that explained everything. Didn't, but it told me more than she realized. For a moment I thought I'd misheard her. Not because the words were unclear, but because they were said so calmly. No anger. No apology. Just a decision that had already been made without me in the room. I stood there holding my phone, staring at the kitchen sink in my tiny apartment, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, trying to understand how I had become optional in my own family. That was the first moment I felt something shift. I asked one question. Just one. Is this what you want? There was a pause on the line. Then my mother sighed like I was making things difficult. It's just easier this way, she said. Easier for who was never discussed. Victoria is my younger sister. The one who was always described as sensitive. The one whose emotions required protection, even when they came at my expense. According to my mother, having me there would make things awkward. People would ask questions. Old tensions might resurface. I realized in that moment that I wasn't being excluded because I'd done something wrong. I was being excluded because my presence reminded them of something they didn't want to explain. The call ended quickly after that. No argument. No goodbye. Just a polite disconnection, like a meeting that had run out of time. I stood there long after the screen went dark, phone still pressed to my ear, waiting for the feeling to arrive. Anger didn't come. Neither did tears. What settled in instead was clarity. Thanksgiving came anyway. It always does. That night I walked past restaurants glowing warm with yellow light. Windows fogged from laughter. Tables crowded with families leaning in close, plates already half empty. Inside one place I saw a father carving turkey while 2 kids argued over who got the drumstick. In another, a woman reached across the table to squeeze her mother's hand. I kept walking, hands shoved into my coat pockets, feeling strangely invisible in a city full of people. Eventually, I ended up at a small diner near the river. Nothing fancy. Vinyl booths. A chalkboard menu. I ordered turkey even though I didn't really want it. The plate arrived heavy and hot, steam curling into the air. And for a moment I just stared at it. I wasn't lonely in the way people expect. I was something quieter than that. I checked my phone once. No messages. No missed calls. No sudden change of heart. That's when it hit me. I hadn't been forgotten. I had been managed. Removed in advance like a potential inconvenience. At the booth beside me an older couple laughed softly, sharing a slice of pie. The woman reached for the man's fork without asking, like it was muscle memory. They looked so ordinary it hurt. Not perfect. Not dramatic. Just steady. I didn't know then that this moment mattered. Only that I noticed it. 5 years later, those same people would sit in the front row of my wedding. 5 years later, my parents would be standing in a room full of strangers, finally realizing they had been replaced in every way that counted. But back then I was just a woman alone in a diner, learning something I'd been avoiding my entire life. Family, I realized, isn't who claims you in private. It's who chooses you when it's visible. And I had no idea that the strangers sitting a few feet away from me that night were about to become my real parents. Or that this Thanksgiving rejection was the first step toward a life I never saw coming. Because this wasn't the first time my family had chosen her over me. It was just the first time they said it out loud. Looking back, the reason that Thanksgiving phone call hurt so much wasn't because it was unexpected. It was because it confirmed a pattern I'd spent most of my life trying not to see. This wasn't a single bad decision or a stressful holiday choice. It was the latest version of something that had been happening quietly for years. Growing up, our house had an unspoken rule. Victoria's comfort came first. It wasn't announced. Didn't need to be. It showed up in small, reasonable decisions that always seemed to tilt in the same direction. If there was only room for one spotlight, it was never mine. When I was 12, my parents forgot my birthday. Not completely. They remembered the date the next morning, after my aunt called to remind them. My mother apologized quickly, already distracted, and promised we'd celebrate properly the following weekend. That weekend never came. Victoria had a school recital, then a sleepover, then a headache. Eventually, my birthday passed the way unimportant things do, quietly, without confrontation. At 16, I graduated early. I stood on a stage in a borrowed gown, scanning the audience for familiar faces, my heart thudding with a mix of pride and nerves. Most parents stood when names were called. Mine didn't. Later, my father explained they'd had trouble parking. My mother said the ceremony was long anyway. Victoria, I was told, had been bored. Each time something like that happened, I reacted the same way. I told myself I was being dramatic. I told myself they loved me in their own way. I told myself that needing less made me easier to love. That phrase, "don't be dramatic," became the family solution to everything. If I looked disappointed, I was overreacting. If I asked for clarity, I was making things uncomfortable. If I went quiet, that was preferable. Silence, I learned, was the safest response. My father played a special role in all of this. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't loud. He was worse than that. He was absent in the moments that mattered. Whenever tension appeared, he chose neutrality, as if fairness lived somewhere in the middle of neglect. He called it keeping the peace. What it really meant was that no one ever stood up for me. Victoria learned early how to use this. Her emotions were treated like fragile glass, something everyone else had to move carefully around. If she was upset, plans changed. If she felt insecure, reassurance poured in from every direction. If she didn't want me there, that preference was treated as wisdom. I became good at reading rooms, good at anticipating reactions, good at adjusting myself so no one else had to feel discomfort. I laughed at jokes that landed poorly. I apologized for things I didn't do. I learned how to shrink without disappearing completely. What I didn't realize at the time was how much energy that took. How much of myself I was folding away piece by piece just to be tolerated. By the time I reached my 20s, I wasn't asking to be chosen anymore. I was just hoping not to be excluded. So when my mother told me not to come home for Thanksgiving, something inside me clicked into place. Not with rage, with recognition. Of course this was happening. Of course it was easier without me. That phone call wasn't the beginning of my pain. It was the moment I stopped pretending it was temporary. I didn't cry after we hung up. I sat very still, noticing how calm my body felt, like it had already accepted the truth. I realized I had been waiting my entire life for someone in my family to choose me out loud, and I understood finally that they never would. That realization didn't break me, clarified things. If they weren't going to choose me, I would have to stop building my life around that hope. Because Thanksgiving wasn't the first time they chose her over me. It was just the first time they didn't bother hiding it. And the next choice I made, the one that came after that silence, changed everything. After that phone call, I did something I hadn't done in years. I stopped trying to convince myself it didn't matter. I didn't rush to defend them in my own head. I didn't soften the memory. I let it sit exactly as it was, clear, uncomfortable, and honest. That was the moment I stopped waiting for them to choose me. I thought I would feel angry. Instead, I felt empty in a way that was almost peaceful. There's a strange relief that comes when hope finally runs out. When you realize you've been standing at a locked door, knocking politely for far too long, and that the door was never meant to open. I called my father that night. Not to argue, not to accuse, just to give him one last chance to surprise me. I told him what Mom had said. I waited for the pause, for the sharp intake of breath, for anything that sounded like concern. He sighed. Not deeply, not painfully, just enough to signal inconvenience. He said he understood why my mother felt the way she did. He said Thanksgiving was already stressful. He said maybe it was better this way. I remember staring at the wall while he spoke, watching the paint crack near the ceiling, noticing how calm his voice was, how reasonable he sounded. That calmness hurt more than shouting ever could, because it meant he had already made peace with losing me. When I asked if he wanted me there, he hesitated. Not long, just long enough. Then he said, "You know I love you," which wasn't an answer. It never had been. After we hung up, I sat on the edge of my bed and waited for the tears. They didn't come. Instead, a thought surfaced, quiet, steady, undeniable. I was done negotiating for space in my own family. That night, I scrolled through social media longer than I should have. Photos of crowded kitchens, long tables, too many chairs pulled close together. Everyone smiling in ways that felt loud and effortless. I noticed something strange. No one was missing in those photos. No empty seat. No explanation. That's when it hit me. I wasn't being forgotten. I was being edited out. There's a difference between being unwanted and being inconvenient. Unwanted people can still be talked about. Inconvenient people are quietly removed so no one has to explain anything. That's what I had become. For the first time, I didn't try to fix it. I didn't call my sister. I didn't send a careful text. I didn't offer to arrive late or leave early or stay out of the way. I stopped bending before anyone asked. I looked around my apartment, the mismatched furniture, the quiet, the space that belonged only to me. It wasn't impressive, but it was mine. And for the first time, I felt something close to control. That's when I made a decision. Not a dramatic one. Not a life-changing declaration. Just a small, practical choice that shifted everything. If I was going to be alone that Thanksgiving, it wouldn't be in silence. It wouldn't be in pajamas with the lights off, pretending the day didn't exist. I wouldn't disappear the way they wanted me to. I grabbed my coat, checked my reflection once, and walked out the door. I didn't know where I was going yet. I just knew I wasn't staying invisible. And that decision, the simple act of leaving my apartment, led me somewhere I never could have planned. Somewhere warm. Somewhere loud. Somewhere I was finally seen. The night air was colder than I expected when I stepped outside. Not sharp, not bitter. Just cold enough to make you aware of your body again. The street was quieter than usual, like the city itself was observing the holiday. I pulled my coat tighter and started walking without a destination in mind. I just knew I didn't want to go back upstairs. As I walked, I passed windows glowing with warmth, living rooms filled with laughter, kitchens crowded with people moving around each other like they belonged there. I didn't feel jealous exactly. It was more like watching a movie I used to think I'd be in someday. I checked my phone. No new messages. No last-minute change of heart. No "we miss you" texts. The silence confirmed what I already knew. That's when I saw the restaurant. It wasn't fancy. Just a warm, well-lit place on the corner with fogged-up windows and a handwritten sign that said, "Thanksgiving dinner served until 9. Inside, I could see tables packed close together. Families leaning in. Plates already half empty. Noise spilling out every time the door opened. I stopped walking. For a moment, I considered turning around. Eating alone on Thanksgiving felt like admitting defeat. Like proof that they'd won. But then I realized something important. Going home and hiding would feel worse. So I opened the door. The warmth hit me first. Then the smell. Roasted turkey, butter. Something sweet I couldn't identify. The kind of smell that makes your chest ache before your stomach does. A hostess looked up and smiled, surprised. "Table for one?" she asked. I hesitated for half a second. Then I nodded. Yes. She didn't pity me. She didn't pause. She just grabbed a menu and led me through the room like it was the most normal thing in the world. That alone felt like a small mercy. She seated me near the middle of the restaurant. Not tucked away. Not hidden. Right between two large tables filled with people talking over each other. I noticed immediately that every other table was full. Except mine. I sat there for a moment, hands folded around my menu, pretending to read. My throat tightened unexpectedly. I hadn't realized how long it had been since I'd been surrounded by this kind of noise without feeling like I was in the way. A server came by and poured water without asking questions. Someone laughed loudly behind me. A kid dropped a fork and groaned dramatically. Life was happening all around me, and I was still allowed to exist inside it. That's when I felt it. The crack. Not sobbing. Not breaking down. Just a quiet sting behind my eyes that made it hard to focus on the words in front of me. I blinked quickly and took a breath, willing it to pass. Apparently not quickly enough. "Hey," a woman's voice said gently from my left. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" I looked up. She was older, late 60s maybe, with silver hair pulled back neatly and kind eyes that didn't rush me. Her hand rested lightly on the edge of her table, not touching me, just close enough to be supportive. The rest of her table had gone quiet. I opened my mouth to answer. Nothing came out. That's when she stood up. "You don't have to explain," she said calmly. "But you don't have to sit alone either." She gestured to the empty chair at her table. "We have more than enough food." And company shouldn't be optional on a day like this. I froze. Every instinct told me to refuse, to apologize, to say I was fine, really, that I didn't want to impose. But something in her tone, steady, confident, kind without being fragile, made it harder to hide. I don't want to intrude, I finally said. She smiled. Oh, honey, she said. You're not intruding. You're being invited. The people at her table shifted, making space without complaint. Someone grabbed another chair. A man with warm eyes nodded at me like he'd already decided I belonged there. I stood up slowly, heart racing, unsure why this felt so monumental. I carried my plate with me like proof that I was allowed to take up space. As I sat down, the woman squeezed my shoulder gently. I'm Eleanor, she said. And you look like you could use a place to land. She had no idea how right she was. And I had no idea that this table, these strangers, were about to change the course of my life. Sitting at that table felt unfamiliar in a way I couldn't immediately explain. Not uncomfortable, just different. No one asked me what I did for work before asking my name. No one scanned me like they were deciding where I fit. They just made room. And for the first time that night, my shoulders dropped without me telling them to. Eleanor introduced me simply. This is Tori, she said. No backstory. No justification. Just my name spoken like it was enough. The others smiled and repeated it, like they wanted to remember. The food was passed around without ceremony. Someone asked if I preferred dark meat or white. Another person slid the gravy closer without asking. I realized how rare it was to be considered in small, ordinary ways, the kind that don't come with expectations attached. Conversation flowed easily, overlapping and messy. They teased each other gently. Someone complained about a burnt pie and everyone laughed anyway. No one was careful with their words. No one seemed afraid of saying the wrong thing. The absence of tension felt almost unreal. At one point, Eleanor raised her glass. Can we make a toast? She asked. The table quieted, forks pausing midair. To unexpected guests, she said, smiling at me. The ones who complete the table, even when we didn't know we were missing a chair. My chest tightened. I lifted my glass with everyone else blinking hard again. This time I didn't fight it as much. Dinner stretched longer than I expected. Plates were refilled. Stories were repeated. I caught myself laughing, actually laughing. Not the polite sound I perfected over the years, but the unguarded kind that surprised even me. At one point, Eleanor leaned in slightly. You know, she said quietly, people who grow up being told they're too much usually aren't. They're just in the wrong rooms. I didn't answer right away. I wasn't sure how to. No one had ever said something like that to me without asking me to change afterward. I just nodded because it felt true in a way I hadn't allowed myself to believe before. When the check came, I reached for my wallet out of reflex. Eleanor gently pushed my hand away. Tonight's on us, she said. You're our guest. The word landed softly, but it stayed. As we stood to leave, people hugged me goodbye like they expected to see me again. Not dramatically. Not performatively. Just naturally. Like this wasn't a one-time kindness meant to be remembered forever. Eleanor pressed a business card into my hand near the door. If you're free on Sunday, she said. We do dinner every week. No pressure. But the invitation is real. I looked down at the card. Her name. An address. A phone number written in pen on the back. The weight of it surprised me. I'll think about it, I said honestly. She smiled. That's all I'm asking. Outside, the air felt different. Not warmer. Not lighter. Just quieter in a way that felt safe. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, watching the restaurant door open and close behind me. I realized something then that would take years to fully understand. Family wasn't something you proved yourself worthy of. It wasn't something you earned by staying small. Sometimes it was simply offered, no conditions attached. I walked home slowly, Eleanor's card tucked into my pocket. I didn't know if I'd call. I didn't know what it would mean if I did. But for the first time in a long while, the future didn't feel like something I had to survive alone. And that scared me almost as much as it comforted me. Because once you feel what it's like to be welcomed, it becomes impossible to go back to pretending exclusion doesn't hurt. I didn't call Eleanor the next day. Or the day after that. I let the card sit on my kitchen counter, half covered by unopened mail, pretending it wasn't there. Not because I didn't want to go, but because wanting it felt dangerous. Hope had never been something I handled casually. Sunday came quietly. No dramatic build. No internal debate. At 4:30 I picked up the card, read the address again, and put on a sweater that felt like me. Nothing performative. Nothing apologetic. Just comfortable enough to breathe in. The Morrison house smelled like roasted vegetables and something sweet baking in the oven. The door opened before I knocked twice. Eleanor smiled like she'd been expecting me all along. Not relieved. Not surprised. Just pleased. Inside, the house was lived in a way that felt intentional. Shoes by the door. Photos on the wall that weren't professionally framed. Noise from the kitchen. Someone calling for help finding a serving spoon. No one lowered their voice when I walked in. "Grab a drink if you want," Eleanor said. No rules. I stood there for a second longer than necessary, waiting for instructions that never came. Then I realized that was the point. Dinner was loud. Not chaotic, just alive. People talked over each other and doubled back mid-sentence. Someone's phone rang and no one glared. A kid spilled water and no one sighed. The room didn't shrink every time something went slightly wrong. At one point Marcus, Eleanor's son, asked me what I did for work. When I answered, he didn't interrupt. Didn't summarize. Didn't joke it away. He asked a follow-up question that showed he'd actually listened. I felt something shift in my chest. Not pride. Relief. After dinner, we stayed at the table longer than necessary. Plates pushed aside. Coffee poured. Stories traded. No one checked the time. No one hinted that I'd stayed long enough. As I stood to leave, Eleanor hugged me again. Not tightly. Not carefully. Just warmly. "You're always welcome," she said like it wasn't a line. I believed her. Sunday dinners became a pattern before I noticed it happening. 1 week turned into 3. 3 into months. Sometimes I brought dessert. Sometimes I just brought myself. Either way, the door opened the same. I learned the rhythm of their house. Who sat where? Who liked extra salt? Who always forgot to put their phone on silent? The small details that mean you're no longer a guest. You're expected. No one asked why my parents never came up in conversation. No one pushed. They didn't need explanations to offer care. They let me decide how much of myself to share. One night, Eleanor said something casually while clearing plates. "You know, you don't have to earn your place here." She didn't wait for a response. Didn't turn it into a speech. She just said it like a fact and kept moving. I stood at the sink drying my hands on a dish towel and felt the words land slowly, like they were settling somewhere deeper than logic. Months later, Marcus and I found ourselves lingering after everyone else drifted into the living room, talking about nothing important, then everything. The transition from friend to something more was so gradual I didn't mark the moment it happened. There was no confession, no dramatic shift, just comfort deepening into connection. When he finally asked me out properly, it felt almost obvious. Like the natural next step in a story that had been unfolding quietly for a long time. We didn't rush anything. We didn't need to. Nothing about this space felt conditional. There was no countdown clock attached to affection. One night, sitting on Eleanor's back porch with a mug of tea cooling between my hands, I realized something that stopped me cold. I wasn't bracing anymore. Not before speaking. Not before laughing. Not before showing up. For the first time in my life, love didn't feel like something I had to perform correctly. And that's when it hit me, this wasn't just kindness. It was family in the truest sense. The kind that doesn't need history to validate it. But the deeper I settled into this life, the more obvious another question became. One I've been avoiding because it scared me more than rejection ever had. What happens when the people who erased you suddenly want access again? I didn't think about my biological family much anymore. Not deliberately. They just faded. Like background noise you don't realize has stopped until the silence feels normal. Life with the Morrisons filled the space they left behind. Sunday dinners became anchors in my week. Birthdays were remembered. Achievements were noticed. Even bad days were allowed to exist without being minimized. Still, there were moments, quiet ones, when an old reflex surfaced. A hesitation before posting photos. A pause before mentioning holidays. Some habits take longer to unlearn. The first time my sister's name reappeared on my phone, I stared at it longer than I should have. Victoria. No emoji. No warmth. Just her name sitting there like a test I hadn't studied for. I didn't open the message right away. I already knew what it would say, not because I'd read it, but because patterns don't disappear just because time passes. Eventually I did read it. Hey, Mom says you haven't been answering calls. We should talk. No apology. No acknowledgement of the years. Just expectation dressed up as concern. I locked my phone and went back to chopping vegetables. The knife felt steady in my hand. That surprised me. Later that night I mentioned it casually to Eleanor. Not dramatically. Not as a confession. Just information. She didn't ask what I planned to do. She didn't offer advice. She only said, "Whatever you choose, you don't owe anyone access to your peace." It wasn't permission. It was validation. The messages increased slowly after that. My mother this time. Longer texts. Softer language. References to family and misunderstandings and how much time had passed. Not once did she ask how I'd been. Only why I'd been gone. That distinction mattered more than she realized. The turning point came a few weeks later during wedding planning. Marcus and I were sitting at the dining table, paperwork spread between us, talking through details neither of us thought would feel so emotional. Then we reached the line that stopped us both. Parents of the bride. I stared at it longer than necessary. The words felt heavier than they should have. Marcus didn't rush me. He just waited. "I don't know what to put," I finally said. Not because I didn't know the names, but because the title no longer felt accurate. That night, Eleanor brought up something gently, almost hesitantly. "You know," she said, "adult adoption is a thing. Not for everyone. But it's an option." The idea landed softly. Not as pressure. Not as replacement. As recognition. I didn't answer right away. I didn't need to. Some truths don't require immediate response, they settle. Over the next few weeks, the thought followed me quietly. Not intrusively. Just present. Like a door I hadn't known existed, now slightly open. When I finally brought it up again, it wasn't dramatic. We were clearing dishes. Normal night. Normal tone. "I've been thinking about what you said," I told Eleanor and Richard. "I think I'd like that. If you would." Eleanor's eyes filled instantly. Richard cleared his throat and nodded once firmly. "Yes," he said. As if the question had already been answered long ago. The legal process was surprisingly simple. Paperwork. Signatures. A judge who smiled kindly and said something about chosen families being just as real. When it was done, I walked out with a new last name. Not because I needed distance from the old one, but because this one finally fit. That's when my biological family noticed me again. My sister called. My mother left voicemails. My father sent a message that started with "We need to talk." Not "I'm sorry." Not "Are you okay?" Just urgency, too late to be meaningful. I didn't respond immediately. Not out of spite. Out of clarity. The wedding invitations went out a week later. Printed cleanly. Simply. Parents of the bride. Richard and Eleanor Morrison. That was the moment everything shifted. And they felt it even from a distance. The first voicemail from my mother was polite. Careful. The kind of tone you use when you're not sure how much power you still have. She said my name slowly, like testing whether it still belonged to her. Then she talked about the wedding. How she'd heard through someone that invitations were going out. She didn't ask if she was invited. She assumed she was. That assumption told me everything. The second voicemail came 2 days later. Less careful. More emotional. She mentioned how hurt she was, how confused, how this wasn't like me. That part almost made me laugh. Because it was exactly like me now. Victoria's message followed shortly after. Short. Direct. "Mom's really upset. Dad too. You need to call them. Not they want to talk. Not they miss you. You need to." I didn't. For a while I just sat with the silence. Not the heavy kind, the clean kind. The kind you choose. Marcus noticed, of course. He always did. But he didn't push. "You don't have to decide anything today," he said. "Or tomorrow. Or ever." That was the difference between obligation and love. One demands urgency. The other offers time. The night my father finally called, I almost didn't answer. Old instincts flared, the reflex to brace, to soften myself before contact. But I answered anyway. Not because I owed him. Because I was curious. His voice sounded older. Not wiser, just thinner. Like something had been drained from it. He didn't apologize at first. He talked around things. About family. About how people make mistakes. About how long it had been. Then he said my new last name out loud. He stumbled over it. That was the first crack. I didn't know you were serious, he admitted. About leaving. About boundaries. About building a life without them. That was his apology, indirect, incomplete, but honest enough to sting. I told him calmly that I wasn't cutting anyone off. I was just no longer chasing people who didn't choose me. He didn't respond to that right away. And for once I didn't fill the silence. The confrontation with my mother happened a week later. In person. Unannounced. She showed up at the Morrisons' house while Marcus and I were there mid-afternoon, sunlight spilling across the living room like it had no idea what it was about to witness. Eleanor opened the door. That alone shifted the power. My mother introduced herself quickly, stiffly, eyes darting past Eleanor into the house, already searching for her place. Eleanor didn't move aside. "I'm here to see my daughter," my mother said. Eleanor smiled politely. "She's right here," she replied. "And she's safe." I stepped forward before it escalated. Not defensively. Not apologetically. Just present. My mother's eyes filled immediately. Not with guilt, with shock. Like she hadn't expected me to look settled. She started talking fast. About the wedding. About how embarrassing it would be if people noticed their absence. About how family doesn't do things like this. That's when I understood. This wasn't about love. It was about optics. "I didn't do this to punish you," I said evenly. "I did it to protect myself." She said I was being dramatic. Old words. Worn thin. Richard spoke then, quietly, without heat. "We didn't take her from you," he said. "You gave her away." Slowly. Repeatedly. The room went very still. My mother looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time. Not as a role, not as a problem, but as a finished decision. She left shortly after. No shouting. No scene. Just the sound of a door closing on something that had ended years ago. The wedding day arrived without tension. Without fear. Without the constant scanning for emotional fallout. I walked down the aisle with Richard at my side. Eleanor waited at the front, eyes bright, hands clasped tightly together. When the officiant announced, "Parents of the bride," and said their names, the room responded exactly as it should have, with warmth, with certainty. I didn't look back. Because for the first time in my life, nothing was chasing me from behind. After the wedding, life didn't slow down. It softened. There's a difference. One is silence. The other is peace. Marcus and I settled into something steady. Not dramatic. Not performative. Just real. Sunday dinners didn't stop after the ceremony. If anything, they became more intentional. Less celebration, more continuity. That's when I realized something quietly important. This family hadn't shown up for a moment. They were staying for the ordinary. A month after the wedding, my sister sent a letter. Not a text. Not a call. A letter. It was long. Carefully written. And completely hollow. She said she felt left out. She said she was confused. She said she didn't understand how things had gone so far. What she didn't say mattered more. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't acknowledge the years of absence. She didn't take responsibility for her role. She centered herself again. I folded the letter neatly and put it away. Not out of anger. Out of clarity. Understanding isn't required for boundaries to be valid. Extended family reacted in waves. Some reached out quietly, apologetically. Others went silent, choosing comfort over truth. A few accused me of being harsh. Of taking things too far. I let those opinions pass through me. They weren't mine to carry anymore. People who benefit from your silence will always resent your voice. Thanksgiving came again the following year. Same holiday. Different reality. This time the table was loud. Messy. Alive. Kids ran in and out of the room. Someone burned the rolls. Someone else laughed too hard at a bad joke. Eleanor squeezed my hand when she thought no one was looking. Not possessively. Just present. I didn't feel the need to document it. No photos staged for proof. No captions defending my happiness. Belonging doesn't need witnesses. Later that night, after the dishes were stacked and the house had quieted, Richard raised a glass. He didn't make a speech. He didn't need to. To chosen family, he said simply. To the people who stay. I felt something settle in my chest then. Not joy. Completion. The past didn't vanish. It just lost its grip. I still think about my biological parents sometimes. Not with longing. Not with bitterness. More like distance. The way you remember a place you outgrew. They reach out occasionally now. Birthdays. Holidays. Polite. Careful. I respond when it feels honest. I don't when it doesn't. That's not cruelty. That's discernment. What I learned slowly, painfully is this. Love that requires you to shrink isn't love. It's control dressed as concern. Family isn't defined by proximity or obligation. It's defined by consistency, by safety, by who shows up without needing to be asked. I didn't lose a family. I stopped chasing one that never held me. And in the space that created, I was finally able to receive the one that did. If you're listening to this and something in your chest feels tight, let me say this clearly. You are not difficult for wanting to be chosen. You are not dramatic for noticing patterns. And you are not wrong for walking away when love comes with conditions. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do. To stop waiting. Life kept moving forward the way it always does when you stop bracing for impact. Not fast. Not dramatically. Just steadily. Marcus and I found our rhythm in small things. Morning coffee. Shared glances across the room. Knowing when to speak and when to let silence sit. Love didn't feel like effort anymore. It felt like alignment. And that difference mattered. A year later we welcomed our first child. No announcement planned. No grand reveal. Just a quiet moment in a hospital room. With Eleanor crying softly and Richard pretending he wasn't. They held my hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. I watched them with a strange kind of awe. Not because they were perfect, but because they were present. That's when it hit me, this wasn't borrowed love. This was permanent. Our child grew up surrounded by warmth that didn't come with conditions. No comparisons. No favoritism. No walking on eggshells. Just safety. Sometimes, late at night, I think about the version of me who took that Thanksgiving phone call years ago. Standing in her apartment, phone pressed to her ear, trying to sound calm while something quietly broke inside her. I wish I could reach back and tell her this. You're not being rejected. You're being redirected. She didn't know yet that strangers would become parents. That loneliness would become belonging. That loss would carve out space for something better. But she kept going anyway. And that mattered. My biological parents still exist on the edges of my life. Not villains. Not heroes. Just people who made choices and continue to live with them. We are polite now. Careful. Distant. There are no more arguments because there are no more expectations. Peace doesn't require closure. It requires acceptance. Every Thanksgiving we gather around the same table. Different ages. Different stories. Same warmth. Someone always asks how we all met. Eleanor always smiles before answering. Oh, she says, waving a hand casually. She came to dinner once. And she never really left. I used to think family was something you were born into. Then I thought it was something you fought for. Now I know better. Family is something you're allowed to rest inside. If you're listening to this and you feel invisible in your own family, hear this clearly. You are not too much. You are not ungrateful. You are not broken. You are simply in the wrong room. And it's okay, more than okay, to leave it. The people who truly love you won't need convincing. They won't need reminders. They won't need you to shrink to fit. They'll pull out a chair and say, you belong here. And when that happens, you won't need revenge. You won't need explanations. You'll just need to stay. People assume stories like this end with confrontation. A final argument. A raised voice. Someone storming out. Mine didn't. It ended quietly, which surprised even me. And maybe that's why it lasted. There was no dramatic phone call from my sister after the wedding. No apology wrapped in excuses. No sudden self-awareness. Just distance. At first, that distance felt strange, like an unfinished sentence. But over time it started to feel like relief. And I realized something important. Silence can be an answer. I stopped checking my phone on holidays, stopped rehearsing responses in my head, stopped wondering what version of me they'd accept next. That space gave me room to breathe, and breathing gave me clarity. The truth is, I didn't lose my family. I outgrew the version of family that required me to disappear. That understanding didn't come all at once. It arrived slowly through ordinary moments. Packing lunches, laughing at inside jokes, feeling safe enough to be quiet. Those moments taught me something no argument ever could. Love that costs you your peace isn't love. It's a negotiation you'll never win. Every now and then, someone asks if I regret it, if I ever wish things had turned out differently. I always pause before answering, not because I'm unsure, but because I want to be honest. I don't regret leaving. I regret how long I stayed. I stayed because I thought loyalty meant endurance, because I believed love had to be earned, because I was afraid that choosing myself meant becoming selfish. Doesn't. Choosing yourself is sometimes the most generous thing you can do, because it stops the cycle, because it teaches others how to treat you, even if they don't like the lesson. I don't hate my biological family. I don't wish them harm. I simply no longer arrange my life around their approval. And that freedom changed everything. If you're listening to this while sitting quietly in a room where you feel unseen, if you're shrinking your voice to keep the peace, if you're being told you're too sensitive when something hurts, this isn't a sign that you're weak. It's a sign that you're aware. Awareness is where change begins. You don't need a dramatic exit. You don't need permission. You don't need to prove your pain to anyone who refuses to hear it. Sometimes the strongest move is stepping toward the people who already treat you like you matter. The ones who don't flinch when you speak. The ones who don't need you to explain yourself. The ones who choose you without conditions. Those people exist. And when you find them, you'll understand something I wish I'd learned sooner. Belonging isn't loud. It's steady. It's calm. It feels like exhaling after holding your breath for years. So if this story resonated with you even a little, take it as a reminder. You're allowed to leave rooms that require you to disappear. You're allowed to build a life that feels safe. You're allowed to redefine family. And when you finally sit at a table where no one asks you to be smaller, stay. The wedding day arrived without anxiety. That was the first sign something had truly changed. I woke up calm, steady, present. Not bracing myself for disappointment, not scanning for tension, just breathing, and that alone felt unfamiliar. I didn't yet know how important that calm would become. The venue was already buzzing when I arrived. Soft music, quiet laughter, people moving with purpose instead of panic. Eleanor squeezed my hand and smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't need reassurance. Richard adjusted his tie and asked if I was ready, not as a formality, but as a promise. And for the first time I meant it when I said yes. They walked me down the aisle without spectacle. No announcement. No explanation. Just presence. And that simplicity carried more weight than anything I'd imagined. It was already different and I felt it. I noticed them before anyone else did. My biological parents stood near the entrance, stiff and uncertain, scanning the room like guests who had arrived at the wrong event. My sister lingered behind them, phone in hand, eyes darting, measuring reactions. They hadn't been invited, not really, but they'd come anyway. And I let them stay for a reason. I didn't feel anger when I saw them. No rush of heat. No tightening in my chest. Just a quiet awareness. This wasn't their moment to take. It was their moment to witness. And that distinction mattered. The ceremony began without delay. No whispers. No disruption. Just vows spoken clearly, slowly, without performance. Every word felt grounded, deliberate, earned. And with each sentence, I felt myself settling deeper into certainty. Then came the introductions. The officiant smiled and gestured toward the front row. Please welcome the parents of the bride, Richard and Eleanor Morrison. Applause followed. Warm. Immediate. Unquestioning. People turned, smiling, nodding, recognizing them as exactly who they were meant to be. And that's when the shift happened. I saw it out of the corner of my eye. My mother's face tightening. My father blinking once then again. My sister's posture stiffening as realization landed. Sharp and undeniable. Nothing had been taken from them. They had simply been replaced. No announcement followed. No explanation. There didn't need to be one. The truth had already been spoken out loud. After the ceremony, my mother approached me near the reception hall. Her voice was low, controlled, carrying the familiar edge of accusation dressed as concern. She asked how I could embarrass them like this, why I would do something so public, why I hadn't warned them. I listened, all the way through. And when she finished, I answered calmly. I didn't do this to you, I said. I built something you chose not to be part of. She started to respond, but Richard spoke first. His voice wasn't raised. Didn't need to be. We didn't steal her, he said gently. You gave her away. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was clarifying. And that was the moment I knew there was nothing left to resolve. Security escorted them out quietly. No scene. No spectacle. Just consequences arriving exactly on time. And as the doors closed behind them, the room exhaled. The reception continued as if nothing had gone wrong. Because nothing had. There was laughter. There were speeches filled with stories that included me. Not as an afterthought, but as a center. There were moments of joy that didn't require permission. And I realized something important as I stood there, watching it all unfold. Peace doesn't announce itself. It simply stays. Later that night, as the room emptied and the music softened, Eleanor hugged me and whispered, "You did beautifully. Not for enduring. Not for surviving. But for choosing." That distinction mattered more than I expected. I didn't feel victorious. I felt complete. And as I left the venue, hand in hand with the life I chose, I understood something I'd never fully believed before. Closure doesn't come from confrontation. It comes from alignment. When your life finally matches your worth, the noise fades on its own. The fallout didn't arrive all at once. It came in waves, quiet at first, then impossible to ignore. I felt it in the days after the wedding, not through confrontation but through distance shifting shape. The kind of silence that tells you people are talking somewhere else. And I knew it wouldn't stay quiet for long. Extended family reached out cautiously. Some messages were supportive, careful, respectful. Others carried confusion disguised as concern, asking what had really happened. I answered only what felt honest and necessary. Anything more would have been explanation, and I was done with that. My sister sent a letter. Not a text. Not a call. A letter, 4 pages, handwritten, emotionally dense, and somehow still missing the point. She spoke about feeling blindsided. About embarrassment. About how hard it was for her. She never once asked how I was doing. That omission said more than the words ever could. My father reached out next. A voicemail late at night, voice unsteady. He said he was proud of me. Said he wished he'd done things differently. But the apology never fully arrived. Just regret hovering around responsibility without touching it. I listened once. I didn't respond. That choice surprised even me. Not because I felt angry, but because I didn't. The urgency to fix things was gone. I finally understood that reconciliation requires 2 people who are equally willing to see the truth. And I no longer needed to be one-sidedly brave. Life settled into something quieter after that. Not empty, just steady. Mornings without tension. Evenings without replaying conversations. I noticed how much space had been taken up by anticipation, and how peaceful it felt without it. That peace wasn't loud, but it was consistent. People assumed the wedding confrontation was the hardest part. It wasn't. The hardest part was accepting that some people only miss you once they lose access, not because they value you but because they're inconvenienced. That understanding hurt briefly. Then it healed completely. Eleanor and Richard never asked questions that required justification. They didn't ask what went wrong. They focused on what was right, what we were building, what came next. That kind of forward-facing love was still new to me. And it changed the way I thought about family entirely. Months passed. Holidays came and went. This time there were photos, full tables, empty chairs acknowledged without shame. No one pretended the past hadn't happened. We simply didn't let it dictate the present. And that felt like freedom. I heard through distant channels that my mother was still upset. That she told people I'd been influenced. That I'd changed. She was right about one thing: I just hadn't become who she wanted. My sister tried again later. Shorter message this time. More careful. Less blame. Still centered on her feelings. I wished her well and didn't reopen the door. Growth doesn't require proximity. What surprised me most was how little I missed the chaos. I didn't miss the anticipation. I didn't miss the self-doubt. I didn't miss the shrinking. And once I noticed that, I stopped questioning my choices altogether. People talk about forgiveness like it's a finish line. Like once you forgive, everything settles. But forgiveness didn't change my life. Boundaries did. They held. Quietly. Reliably. I learned something important during that time. Family isn't defined by longevity. It's defined by consistency. By who shows up when there's nothing to gain. By who doesn't require you to explain your worth. Looking back, I don't frame the wedding as a victory. It wasn't about winning. It was about alignment, my values finally matching my life. And once that happened, everything else fell into place naturally. The story didn't end with confrontation. It ended with clarity. And clarity, I've learned, is far more powerful than closure. The weeks after everything settled were quieter than I expected. Not awkward. Not heavy. Just calm in a way I wasn't used to yet. The kind of calm that doesn't ask anything from you. And I realized I was finally living without bracing for impact. People often assume peace feels dramatic when you've lived without it for so long. Like a rush. Like relief crashing over you. But peace arrives slowly for me. In ordinary moments. And that made it real. I noticed it first in the mornings. Waking up without replaying conversations. Without rehearsing explanations I'd never give. Without checking my phone with that familiar knot in my chest. Silence stopped feeling like punishment. Eleanor would call just to ask how my day was going. Not because she needed anything. Not because she was worried. Just because she wanted to hear my voice. That alone rewired something in me. Richard never pushed advice. He listened. And when he did speak, it was measured, thoughtful, never corrective. The absence of judgment felt almost unfamiliar at first. But I leaned into it. There were moments when the past tried to resurface. A holiday song in a store. A family photo someone tagged me in by accident. Brief flashes of the old ache. But they pass more quickly now. I didn't suppress those feelings. I acknowledged them. Then I let them move on. Because they no longer lived at the center of my life. And that was the difference. My biological family faded into the background gradually. Not through confrontation. Through lack of access. When there was nothing left to pull from me, the noise stopped. And with it, the confusion. I stopped asking myself whether I'd done the right thing. That question belonged to the version of me that still needed approval. The version that believed love had to be negotiated. I wasn't her anymore. And she didn't need to come back. Marcus noticed the change before I did. One evening, he told me I seemed lighter. Not happier, just steadier. More present. Like I wasn't carrying invisible weight anymore. He was right. I wasn't performing for anyone now. Not adjusting my tone. Not shrinking my joy. Not translating myself into something more acceptable. I was just here. That steadiness changed how I moved through the world. How I worked. How I rested. How I trusted my instincts. When you're no longer explaining yourself, you hear yourself more clearly. The Morrison home became a place I didn't have to prepare for. I could arrive as I was. Quiet days were welcome. Loud laughter was too. There were no emotional contracts attached. No scorekeeping. One evening, Eleanor said something that stayed with me. She told me gently that love isn't proven by endurance. It's proven by consistency. And that explained everything I'd felt but never named. That clarity was its own kind of healing. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt aligned. Like my inner world finally matched my outer one. And that alignment was enough. The need to be seen by people who refused to look disappeared. Not because I hardened, but because I no longer mistook absence for mystery. Some people show you exactly who they are. Believing them is an act of self-respect. I learned that peace isn't passive. It's chosen. Over and over again. Sometimes quietly. Sometimes in moments no one else notices. And the truth is, that choice didn't make my life smaller. It made it clearer. Stronger. More intentional. It gave me room to grow without apology. I didn't lose a family. I gained a life that fit me. One that didn't require shrinking to survive. And once I understood that, there was nothing left to grieve. I moved into a small apartment on the east side of the city, a month after everything settled. Nothing fancy. One bedroom, uneven floors, a view of a brick wall from the kitchen window. But it was quiet. It was mine. The first night there, I slept on a mattress on the floor with a borrowed lamp and 2 plates I hadn't unpacked yet. And I slept better than I had in years. Peace, I learned, doesn't need square footage. And that was the first sign I'd chosen right. I didn't keep much from the old house. Few clothes. Some books. My son's drawings folded carefully into a folder. Everything else felt like someone else's life. And I didn't want to drag it forward with me. Letting go wasn't dramatic. It was practical. Like clearing a desk before starting real work. That emptiness made room for something new. Work came next, quietly and without ceremony. I went back to what I'd always been good at, numbers, organization, solving problems people didn't want to look at too closely. My first client was small. A local business drowning in its own mess. They didn't care who I used to be married to. They cared that I fixed what was broken. I did. They paid on time. Word spread. Slowly. That was how I wanted it. There were no announcements, no victory posts, no need to prove anything to anyone who hadn't earned a front row seat. I learned to enjoy that anonymity, to enjoy being known only for the work I did, not the role I once played. Every invoice paid felt better than applause ever had. And I realized success didn't need witnesses. My son adjusted faster than I expected. Kids sense safety before they understand it. He liked the new place. He liked that I cooked without rushing, that I laughed more, even when nothing funny was happening. We built small routines, Saturday pancakes, evening walks, library trips where he picked books way above his reading level. I never explained everything to him. I didn't need to. He could feel the difference. That trust came back on its own. One night after he fell asleep, I sat on the couch with a mug of tea and noticed something strange. My shoulders weren't tense. My jaw wasn't clenched. I wasn't replaying conversations in my head or rehearsing defenses for arguments that might happen tomorrow. My life no longer required armor. That realization stayed with me. People sometimes ask if I feel bitter. If I regret not exposing more, not saying everything out loud. The truth is simpler than that. I don't need them to understand. I don't need them to admit anything. Closure didn't come from watching someone else fall apart. It came from watching myself stand up and keep going. That was enough. I learned that rebuilding doesn't happen all at once. It happens in quiet decisions. In choosing rest over reaction. In choosing stability over spectacle. In choosing yourself even when no one is watching. Those choices compound. They change how you walk into a room. How you speak. How you listen. They change everything. There's a color on the wall of my bedroom now. Soft, warm, nothing dramatic. I chose it because it made the space feel calm. That was the only requirement. I didn't ask anyone's opinion. I didn't second-guess myself. I just chose it and moved on. Sounds small, but it wasn't. It was freedom in miniature. I don't hate my past. I don't romanticize it either. Taught me what patience really is. What strategy looks like when it's rooted in self-respect, not revenge. And what happens when you stop explaining your worth and start living it. That lesson stays with me. This is what my new beginning looks like. Quiet mornings. Honest work. A child who feels safe. A life that no longer needs permission. I didn't win by taking something back. I won by building something forward. And that's the kind of ending that lasts. I don't tell this story because I think I'm special. I tell it because I know how many people are quietly surviving inside situations that don't look dramatic enough to justify leaving. Situations where nothing is technically wrong, but everything feels heavy. If that's you, I want you to know something important. You're not imagining it. And you're not alone. For a long time I thought strength meant enduring. Staying calm. Staying quiet. Making myself easier to live with so other people could stay comfortable. I confused patience with loyalty and silence with peace. It took losing almost everything to realize that real strength looks very different. It looks like choosing yourself. You don't need a perfect plan to start over. You don't need permission or approval, or a dramatic ending where everyone finally understands. Most of the time they won't. And that's okay. Closure isn't something other people give you. It's something you decide to stop waiting for. That decision changes everything. If you're listening to this and wondering whether it's too late, let me answer that clearly. It's not. Not to rebuild. Not to reset. not to choose a quieter, steadier life that actually belongs to you. Time doesn't punish honesty. It rewards it. Even when the reward comes slowly, there is power in patience. Not the kind that keeps you stuck, but the kind that lets you move with intention instead of reaction. The kind that protects your dignity while everything else shifts around you. Quiet power doesn't announce itself. It just lasts, long after noise fades. If you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, or reduced to a role that never fit you, let this be your reminder. Being overlooked can become an advantage. It gives you space to learn, to prepare, to decide who you want to be when no one is watching. That's where real change begins. And if you're in the middle of something painful right now, something unresolved, something that feels unfair, I hope you take this with you. You don't owe anyone your breakdown to justify your breakthrough. You're allowed to heal privately. You're allowed to move forward quietly. You're allowed to choose peace. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you even a little, you're not alone here. There are more stories like this, about patience, strategy, resilience, and quiet wins that don't make headlines but change lives. And they're coming. If you want to hear them, stay with me. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is keep going.